CEO of Goya Foods, Robert Unanue, explains why he believes we are on the precipice of a food shortage, but on the same topic, he offered a solution that was very subtle but spoke volumes to me. Former CEO of Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein, said too much growth and too much stimulus by the government during COVID lockdowns has caused inflation, but according to the Biden administration, everything is blamed on the Russia-Ukraine war. Is it wise or in the best interest of Americans to send $40 billion to Ukraine while the entire country is suffering from food crisis, inflation crisis, gas crisis, and of course, a border crisis? Well, a wise man once told me, no good deed goes unpunished. Okay, my friends, let's take a closer look together.
Inflation hitting a new 40-year high in the month of March. Americans especially getting hit hard at the grocery store. The price of items like dried beans, canned vegetables, flour, all up better than 10% from the same time just 1 year ago.
Going supply chain issues, raising the cost of groceries. Bob Unanue is the CEO of Goya, the company whose products you see in just about every supermarket all over the place.
The government has stepped in as our competitor. They've incentivized people not to work. 4 million people left the workforce in September. We are heading for hard times. We are dismantling this country. We're getting soft. We have the government as our biggest competitor. The government needs to get out of the way and let us work.
With rising food prices and a sense of worry about the upcoming food shortage, the president and the CEO of one of the biggest food production companies, Goya Foods, has now confirmed that the world is at the edge of the upcoming food crisis. While expressing multiple factors and facts about the crisis, CEO Robert Unanue also blamed the current administration for provoking this war and showing incredible weakness in handling the ongoing situation. As Russia and Ukraine together produced half of the fertilizer consumed by the United States, he said the current war between the two has now forced the fertilizer prices to jump up 4 times higher. For example, nitrogen-based fertilizers are made from natural gas. But after cutting off channels of fossil fuel consumption from Russia, the cost of fertilizers are finding no way to slow down. Not to forget, Russia is also one of the world's biggest exporters of all 3 major groups of fertilizers, on which most of the countries depend for their food production. This 4 times increase in fertilizer prices is already affecting African and European countries. Furthermore, Russia and Ukraine are together responsible for 29% of global wheat exports, 19% of global corn supply, and 80% of global sunflower oil exports. However, the irrigation system in the southeastern region of Ukraine have now been bombed during war, and many crucial ports of the supply chain to the world have been cut off by Russia. For example, Mariupol, a port on the Azov Sea, has already been cut off, and Odessa, an essential port located at the Black Sea, is now the next target of the Russians. And if this Black Sea seaport gets taken over by Russia, then it could completely prevent Ukraine from exporting. Robert argued the Russians, attacked irrigation systems, they have attacked train systems, and they have sent millions of women and children into exile. Robert also said that the biggest factor of rise in food cost is transportation. Shipping in a pipeline is free, but when you put it on a ship with rates 10 times where they were 2 years ago, we are buying oil at retail. To express the massive impact of the increase in transportation cost, he gave an example of coconut water, which his company imports from Thailand in bulk. He said a few months back, a case of coconut water used to cost $1.44. But now the cost per case has increased to $15 due to rising transportation expenditure, which is tenfold the inflation. By arguing that the world has weaponized food, Robert pointed towards the recent increase in the consumer price index and inflation as a result of these facts we have discussed. Now, according to the Labor Department, the consumer price index, which measures things like gasoline, healthcare, groceries, and rents, has increased by 8.5%, which is the fastest since 1981. Moreover, energy prices have jumped by 32% from last year. Gasoline prices have jumped by 48% from last year, And food prices have jumped by 8.8% since the last year by mainly increasing the price of bakery and cereal products, poultry, fish and meat, fresh fruits and vegetables, and eggs. Nevertheless, the CEO has also expressed that the United States is currently more independent with regards to food production, and it is most likely to get over this threat in a short period of time, but warned that the U.S. will have to tighten our belt and consume less. It should also be noted that the recent fires and unknown accidents occurring at various food processing facilities in the country puts serious pressure on providing sufficient food in all states. The reason behind this, noted by Robert, can be linked with the non-maintenance of the facilities during lockdowns in COVID-19. As Goya's plant stopped twice a year for maintenance, the company has also launched a mission to provide humanitarian and spiritual aid to Ukrainian refugees in Poland. Robert said, "God created humanity, but humanity has created the way to destroy itself, nuclear, chemical, and biological. Now we are using food as a weapon. We have to move closer to God. We need to love and build, not hate and destroy. That's our mission."
Be ready for a recession. That's the stark warning from Goldman Sachs senior chairman and former CEO Lloyd Blankfein, who said Sunday there is a, quote, very, very high risk for a U.S. recession. This comes as Goldman's chief economist Jan Hatzius has slashed his U.S. growth forecast for this year in 2023 following recent turmoil in the markets. Meanwhile,
how comfortable are we now to rely on those supply chains that are not within the borders of the United States that we can't control? Do we feel good about getting all our semiconductors from Taiwan, which is, again, an object of China?
After corporate giants came forward to express their anger on the Biden administration for the failing to handle the inflation crisis, former CEO Lloyd Blankfein of one of the leading investment firms, Goldman Sachs, has now issued a warning to the people to prepare themselves for the upcoming economic recession. Blankfein, who ran the company for more than a decade, came to the realization of a dim economic future after witnessing an astonishing rise in prices. He said, "It's definitely a risk. If I were running a big company, I would be very prepared for it. If I was a consumer, I'd be prepared for it. But it's not baked in the cake. It's going to be hard for people to have savings. But if they already have savings, they are not going to necessarily increase it quickly because of inflation. But they are starting in a much better place than we were then." Blankfein further expressed that some of the poorest Americans will feel the worst effects of inflation, as recession is a very, very high risk factor. If we look at the recent data published by the American Automobile Association, the average price for a gallon of regular gas in the entire country stands around $4.47, whereas in California, it is nearly touching $6. Not to forget, with the rise in consumer prices by 8.3% since last year, parents are also struggling to find the essential baby formula products in each state. Many experts are now blaming the administration and the policymakers for failing to stop the prices from rising. Furthermore, Blankfein also agreed that inflation is caused by too much growth and too much stimulus by the government during COVID lockdowns. A reference by the former CEO was also made to the analysis conducted by the Federal Reserve of San Francisco, which came to the conclusion that the inflation crisis is caused mostly by COVID stimulus bill introduced by President Joe Biden. This proves that inflation was present in the country even before the Russia-Ukraine war, thus totally negating the excuses made by the Biden administration about linking the inflation crisis with the current war.
It's a war of words between Jeff Bezos and the White House as they bicker over how to address the inflation crisis.
Meanwhile, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos criticized President Joe Biden on Twitter over the weekend over rising inflation.
The ongoing virtual combat between Amazon's Jeff Bezos and the Biden administration on the rising inflation crisis in the country has now become more intense after the White House spokesman, Andrew Bates, decided to respond to Bezos' comment on Twitter. The fight originated when President Biden recently boasted on Twitter about a reduction in the federal budget deficit and pressed more on his minimum tax on billionaires agenda, which focuses on charging a 20% minimum tax rate on the wealthiest U.S. families to control inflation. Soon Bezos responded by stating, "The newly created disinformation board should review this tweet, or maybe they need to form a non sequitur board instead. Raising corporate taxes is fine to discuss. Taming inflation is critical to discuss. Mushing them together is just misdirection. In fact, the administration tried hard to inject even more stimulus into an already overheated inflationary economy. And only West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin saved them from themselves. Inflation is a regressive tax that most hurts the least affluent. Misdirection does not help the country. It should be noted that Joe Manchin stopped Biden's plan to spend trillions of dollars on his Build Back Better agenda by stating that he has never been able to figure out how Biden was planning to lower the cost by spending more into the economy. As the White House could not hold their breath much longer, Andrew Bates sarcastically directed Bezos to abide by the minimum tax on billionaires agenda and tweeted, "It doesn't require a huge leap to figure out why one of the wealthiest individuals on earth opposes an economic agenda for the middle class that cuts some of the biggest costs families face, fights inflation for the long haul, and adds to the historic deficit reduction the president is achieving by asking the richest taxpayers and corporations to pay their fair share." It also unsurprising that this tweet comes after the president met with labor organizers, including Amazon employees. However, Bezos again responded by accusing the White House that they are trying to shift the focus away from the inflation crisis. He said, "They know inflation hurts the neediest the most, but unions aren't causing inflation, and neither are wealthy people. Remember, the administration tried their best to add another $3.5 trillion to federal spending. They failed, but if they had succeeded, inflation would be even higher than it is today. And inflation today is at a 40-year high."
As Putin's war rages on, costing ordinary Ukrainians their lives and livelihoods. Late Tuesday, the U.S. House overwhelmingly passing a $40 billion aid package. Ukraine says it urgently needs to win.
The House has approved a $40 billion aid package for Ukraine. Now it's up to the Senate to send the bill to the president's desk.
As Putin desperately accelerates his campaign of horror and brutality, Mr. Speaker, horror and brutality in Ukraine, time is of the essence. Americans continue to move together with our allies to level the historic punishment against Putin for his senseless aggression, isolating Russia and devastating its economy.
While the entire country is suffering from food crisis, inflation crisis, and of course, the border crisis, a massive $40 billion taxpayer-funded relief bill for the Ukraine crisis is on the way to Biden's desk for obtaining his signature. The bill consists of $20.4 billion in military assistance, $8.5 billion in economic assistance, $3 billion in humanitarian assistance to address food shortages around the world, and $3.4 billion extra for further humanitarian military aid to Ukraine. The astonishing part is that despite Senator Rand Paul making valid and reasonable attempts to stop the bill from passing, the House and the Senate leaders unanimously agreed to pass the bill. Senator Paul argued that the changes should be made to the legislation to ensure that an inspector general could monitor and report exactly how the billions of dollars were being spent in Ukraine. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene also supported Senator Paul with respect to the suspicious involvement of the Biden administration with the Ukrainian region. Now, Paul said, "We cannot save Ukraine by dooming the U.S. economy. Gasoline alone is up 48%, and energy prices are up 32% over the last year. Food prices have increased by nearly 9%. Used vehicle prices are up 35% for the year, and new vehicle prices have increased 12% or more. Americans are feeling the pain, and Congress seems intent only on adding to that pain by shoveling more money out the door as fast as they can. My oath of office is to the U.S. Constitution, not to any foreign nation, and no matter how sympathetic the cause, my oath of office is to the national security of the United States of America." Furthermore, he argued that inflation doesn't just come out of nowhere. Skyrocketing inflation prices are the direct result of $5 trillion spent by the government in COVID-19 bailouts. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, on the other hand, argued that bill does things we should not be doing. Americans are suffering from a baby formula crisis, a border crisis, skyrocketing inflation and fuel crisis, and they are fed up with America last politicians. However, despite making all these valid arguments, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, during his weekend visit to Kyiv region of Ukraine, openly promised the Ukrainian leaders that the bill would still be passed with the support of a strong majority of Republicans in the Congress. The tyrant can always find an excuse for his tyranny. The unjust will not listen to the reasoning of the innocent. These statements with deep meanings are recovered from a story written by one of the famous Greek storytellers, Aesop, during 5th century BC. Despite dating back thousands of years, Aesop's stories engraved with moral and spiritual education have managed to serve children and adults for centuries. Furthermore, his stories were even used by the various civilizations to shape their culture and way of living. All of his stories had a deep warning within. Let's have a look at one of his famous stories that managed to reach us through the centuries. Once upon a time, an innocent stray lamb was feeling thirsty in an unknown location. After witnessing a woodland stream, he immediately went towards it to satisfy his craving. However, what he failed to notice is that a hungry wolf was watching him closely from a distance. And soon he went towards the lamb to fulfill his hunger. Surprisingly, seeing the innocent lamb shivering from the wolf's presence, the wolf decided to look for an excuse to take his life. So the wolf asked, "How dare you come to my region and dip yourself in the water? You deserve to be punished for coming here without my permission." Lamb said, "But your highness, do not be angry. I cannot possibly dip myself into the water you are drinking up there. Remember, you are upstream and I am downstream." Wolf angrily says, "You dipped yourself in it. And besides, I have heard that you told lies about me last year." Lamb replied, "How could I have done so? I wasn't born into this year." Wolf replied, "If it wasn't you, it was your brother." Lamb said, "I have no brothers." Wolf replied, "Well then, it was someone in your family anyway. But no matter who it was, I do not intend to be talked out of my breakfast." Without saying anything else, the wolf snatched his target and dragged him off into the dense forest. Thus, the moral of the story: the tyrant can always find an excuse for his tyranny. The unjust will not listen to the reasoning of the innocent. I appreciate you all for joining me. Have a good night, and I'll see you next time.